Good morning. My name is Pete Snodgrass. I'm an art instructor here at OPC. I believe I've been here 7 or 8 years. I teach watercolor. I can do acrylics. However, my primary interest is watercolor. This morning, I want to introduce you to some of the beginning factors that need to think about when you're going to enter into watercolor painting. Watercolor painting, number one, is fun, and that's what it should be. Number two, it's not for the control person. Watercolor painting is kind of one of those things, once in a while the water just does its own thing. But that's wonderful because when you'll see what it does is something that you cannot do. The first thing I want to discuss is supplies. And I always say that if you're going to start watercolor painting and you're going to invest $100, this is just an example, you want to have $50 into paper, $30 into paints, and $20 into brushes. Paper is the most important part because it's like painting a wall. If the wall is not good, you can put on 40 coats of paint and it's not going to get better. So the quality of your paper is important. This is Arches paper, which is made in France. It's a very good paper. It's used by probably 80% of the watercolor painters in the world. It's got a lot of linen and it's got a lot of fiber in it, so you can scrub, scratch, scrape, sand. It'll take a lot of abuse. This here is American-made paper. It comes in a pad like this, and it's man-made, and what happens with man-made paper, they're made like plywood in layers and then pressed together. So sometimes when it gets extremely wet, it starts peeling apart. However, this is good paper to use for painting greeting cards. I sell greeting cards at different gift shops, and one of them is at the Birds Unlimited over on Adams Road here in Rochester. But this is good paper for greeting cards because you're not going to do a lot of things you normally would do when you're making a full-size watercolor painting. What I do is I take this pad of paper and I cut it in two and fold it. And that makes a greeting card that fits an envelope that you can buy at Office Depot. I have found that greeting cards is a great way to practice. First of all, you don't have to get out a lot of things. It doesn't take a lot of area, and you can sit and play with these. I found when I first started and got into this, that greeting cards was great in helping me learn to mix colors. Because there again, you can play with this and you can create a floral so easily, a violet, a sunflower, a poinsettia, and of course then I finally get into more detailed, but that's just me. But it is good practice, and you will learn a lot about mixing color. There again, I said, there's Arches paper, there's other papers, there's Strathmore, and from England, there's a Gemini that's from England. But what I found over the years is they have a soft textured surface, and I don't care for a soft texture. This is a little bit hard, but it does have a little bit of texture to it. When it comes to, there's a 140-pound paper. This is 140 pounds, and there's a 300 pounds. Of course, 300 pounds is a lot heavier than this. It's kind of like painting on a piece of cardboard. But you get into large paintings, using the 140 pounds, you have to stretch it and staple it down to plywood so that it doesn't buckle when you're painting. The 300 pound eliminates that. The 300 pound paper, of course, is quite more expensive than this, and I hardly ever use it. It's one of those things, it's whatever you get used to. But the 300 pound paper uses a lot more paint, and if you're not used to it, you'll end up many times having to paint things twice. There's cold pressed paper, that's what I use. And there is hot press. Hot press is the same thing, 140 pounds, but it's very smooth. Hot press paper works very well for florals. However, I don't use it hardly at all. It's just one of those things, whatever you get used to, you kind of stay with it. Okay, now we're going to talk about paints. There's transparent and opaque paints. 90% of what I use are transparent colors. Transparent colors, you can layer one color over another and come up with some beautiful effects. Also, you cannot get mud. Anyone who has painted knows that if you mix certain colors, you end up with an ugly brown green. You get into opaque colors, you can get that more rapidly. So I stay away from the opaque paints, primarily because I like the luminescence of the paper coming through those transparent colors. When it comes to brands of paints, the most popular brand is Winsor Newton. This is a tube of Winsor Newton. When you're going to buy tubes, and I prefer tubes, you can buy a palette like this where each one of these wells is like a pressed tablet, which is good. You'll get the same result. I just prefer using a tube where I squeeze out the paint. When you're buying paints, my suggestion is you start using the smaller tubes. This is a kind of a middle-sized tube, and this is a large tube. What I find is when you buy the large tube, many times it dries out before you use it. Although it's cheaper in the long run, it just makes a washout. Winsor Newton is a good brand. Da Vinci is good. Daniel Smith is very good. Cheap Joe's Art Journey, American Journey is good. And for sources of supply, there's Cheap Joe's Art. It's all mail order. The number is 888-792-6089. Blick's Art Store, they also do a mail order, and they also have a store on Woodward Avenue, just south of 12 Mile on the east side, and it's easy to pick out because the whole front of the building is red. Jerry's Artorama is 800-827-8478. I only have that in there because when I get to brushes, I'll show you a set of brushes that is good and inexpensive, and they're the only ones that carries it. There's Green's Art Store in Rochester, but then again, they're not a mail order, big operation, so of course their prices are somewhat higher. Hobby Lobby in Sterling Heights, and there's also one over in Chesterfield. There's probably one over here somewhere, but they probably have the best art supply of any of the craft shows around here. Michael's has some, but they're very limited. Now we'll get to brushes. Paints are more important than brushes in my opinion. It's that old story, it's not the brush, it's the guy that's on the end of the brush. So it comes in various sizes. This happens to be the largest I use, which is for big washes. If you're painting skies, you want to use big strokes. This happens to be a sable brush, which is the most expensive. This brush is probably $85. Sable brushes were used years and years ago. They're still available. They're good. However, they are very expensive. I prefer a man-made brush, and one of them is this type of a brush. And you will see here it's got a chisel type handle. And that's important because you can use that to scrape out weeds, trees, reeds, do scraping with that handle. That comes in various sizes. I use this is a 1/2 inch, I believe. Yeah, this is a 1/2 inch, and this one is a 1 inch. You can see the difference. This is a very good brush. I use it quite often. This, there again, for small details, and you will learn, and I will show you pretty soon, the difference between using a flat brush versus a round brush. A round brush, of course, is like this. This is a mixture of man-made with natural fur from many of them are squirrel, and a combination is good. However, this set here is what's available from Jerry's Artorama, and it's called Mimic by Creative Mark. I don't know why, but they offer 8 in a set, and I didn't order the whole set, which I should. Many in my class use this set of brushes and they think it's great. It has a nice point. You can see it bounces back to shape, and that's important. So that brush is, I believe, it comes in, there's an 8 brush set for around $30, which is very inexpensive, and they will last a long time. There again, this is you got the flat, the round, and this is called a rigger brush, which is really for fine details, but it's an important brush. When you get to colors, to start out, my recommendation is you start out with Winsor Red or Permanent Rose. Winsor Yellow or Aurelian. This is Aurelian, this is yellow. They're very similar. Aurelian is a wonderful color for glazing. It's very transparent, and just a little yellow sometimes over another color just makes it glow. Leaf green, and leaf green I find only available at Hobby Lobby. Grumbacher used to make one very similar, but I don't find it anymore. It's a nice bright green, as you can see right here. Perylene green is really dark, but it is transparent. Many greens are not transparent colors. This is not a transparent color. There again, you can get in trouble with those. Payne's gray. Payne's gray, many times I use it and it comes across as black, like in here and down in here, but it's very transparent. Mixing Payne's gray with yellow, you can get some beautiful greens, and that shows you how much blue is in Payne's gray. Brown matter is kind of a reddish brown, and there again, this is brown matter up in here, mixed with some other colors, as you can see, but this primarily is brown matter. Cobalt blue, this is cobalt blue in here. Cobalt blue is this very standard blue, and there again, it mixes well with Permanent Rose, makes beautiful lavenders, and mixed with yellow, it can make some beautiful greens. You learn to mix colors. The more you learn to mix colors, the better your paintings are. I have a book at home, and it shows the artist painted 2 paintings exactly alike. One, he mixed all the colors, and the other, he made colors right out of here. And there's a dramatic difference. The one where he mixed the colors is by far a more beautiful painting. Okay. There again, for starters, I recommend you have a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch flat with the chisel handle, a number 6 and a number 8 round, and a number 2 rigger, or sometimes it's called a script liner. Different brands of brushes will make the size vary. A number 6 in one brand will be a little bit different than a number 6 in the other brand, and that's just the way they make them. Okay, now for storage. When you wash your brush, wash it just in clean water, and always store it so the handle is like this, or it's flat like this. Never leave the brush in your paints or in the water like this, even for 4 or 5 minutes. It will bend the fibers, and sometimes they will go back and sometimes they won't. But that's the worst thing there is on a brush, is to leave it setting like this. Some of the, storing it flat like this, there again, this is a carrier that one of my students made, and it's, of course, it's denim and it's very absorbable, so you roll it up and it dries the brushes out. I have seen them, you can buy them. I have seen them where they're made out of bamboo. They almost look like a bamboo placemat. I'm sure that's what they were. And again, you can roll them up in that, and that's absorbable. There are other items in watercolor painting that you will use, and you won't believe some of them, but salt. Salt is, I don't know whether you can see this or not, but right in here and in the tail is where I use salt. Salt absorbs the water and it moves the paint around on its own. You don't have any control of it. There again, That's part of the fun of watercolor, because it will do things you can't do. But salt is very important in creating texture. And that's one of the things one of the things you're always trying to do is to create texture. Here, in the top of this and down in here is where I use salt. And you can see the effect. It gives the effect of foliage back there, but you don't have to paint it. Okay, here again, I want to get back to the items that we're going to use that aren't normally involved in what you, not normally, is what you wouldn't think is involved. Because there's a lot of things happens in watercolors that doesn't involve a brush. Number one is the salt, and there again you can use regular salt or kosher salt. Kosher salt just makes bigger, looks like flakes. If you're going to paint a snow scene and you got snow falling, kosher salt can make a beautiful snow scene. The next item is a pencil. This is an H pencil. They cost about $1 a piece. You buy them in an art store. But they erase better than anything else that I've found. Many artists leave their drawing on there with the pencil and just leave it, and that's the way life is. Sometimes I erase, sometimes I don't. But if you're going to do it, this is a great pencil to use. A white eraser, and it's just a plain old white eraser you buy at Office Depot or Office Max. A utility knife. A utility knife is for scraping. And one of those knives from the hardware store, you know that you can make the blade come out and break it off and get a new one and get a new one. It works great. Paper towel. The best paper towel to use, and you're going to be blotting and picking up water and paint, is Viva. Viva has no pattern. In fact, when you go to the store, watch, because Viva now has it with a pattern. And if it has a pattern embossed in it and you touch your paper, you're going to have that pattern right there. I learned a how because I did that on a floral, and I had to use that on the rest of the painting so that I got the same pattern in the background. Kleenex. You can use Kleenex for blotting, picking up. Also, Kleenex, buy the very cheapest you can buy, nothing with lotion, because if you touch the paper with a Kleenex that has lotion, it will leave that on your paper and then it won't take paint. All at once, it's resisting. Masking tape. Blue 3M masking tape. You see it. You see that at Lowe's, Home Depot, any of those. I usually use about a 2-inch tape, and that is to tape down your paper to your board, and I will show you that in just a minute. I'll do it right now. This is 1/2-inch gator board. It's very hard. Got a very hard surface. I've been using this for at least 10 years. They do sell at Hobby Lobby 1/2-inch foam board. It's not as hard as this, but it's a very good surface. The nice thing is it's very light. When I first started, we used plywood. Well, carrying plywood around and flipping it around wasn't as much fun. But this will last a long time. One of the key things is tape the edges of this with white artist tape. Comes in 2-inch rolls, and it's also good for mounting your paintings onto mats or mounting your mats into a frame. But this protects the edge from being beat up, and that's why this has lasted for 10 years. Interesting enough, this was originally designed to be used, and it was used, on the interiors of airplanes to make walls. That's why it's so very light, but it's also very sturdy and very hard. Elmer's glue is one of the things you can use. You can make designs with Elmer's glue on the dry paper, let it dry, and when you paint over it, it will resist that in some areas, and you'll notice a pattern through there. Natural sponge, and you want a natural sponge versus you can use cellulose sponge or natural sponge. A natural sponge is great for making trees, leaves, shrubbery. You can take a cellulose sponge and cut it into wedges and make beautiful pine trees by just painting on the sponge and then dabbing it on the paper. You'll need 2 water containers. One is for, well, they're both clear water. One of them is to wash your brush. The second one is for you to get clear water when you dip into your paints. A Windex bottle is very important. If you can find the old one that had the plunger, that's even better, but these will work. If you want to create texture, you can spray Windex, and Windex, the spray that comes out of here is different than a trigger type, because the particles vary in size. You don't notice that, but there's big ones and little ones and middle-sized ones, and when you can spray that on there and then splatter it with some paint, and all at once you got beautiful foliage. Something you could not create with a brush or anything else. But a Windex bottle is important. And it's important when you want to make okay, this is an example of a tree where I splattered on some clear water, and then I took and splattered with paint and don't touch the paper, and now it has created a pine tree over here that you couldn't create any other way. Okay. That concludes what we're going to cover today on what it is, what it takes to get started. Right now I'm going to show you some different things that it takes to get into it and to create a painting. The last thing I'll do, it won't be on this tape, but the last thing I'll do is do a painting later, but not on this film. The first thing you want to do is you want to get your paints ready for painting. It's called agitating your paints, and you'll see here, all you want to do is just spray them lightly with a little bit of water because they've dried out a little. If you have a palette, I could do it with this one. You take a flat sponge, moist that, and put it in before you close it, and that helps keep these moist. It's a good idea, but something I've never done. The first thing that happens when you're going to paint is, what do I paint? Everyone's a blank. You can paint anything. A good example is my mother-in-law used to paint, and she lived in Traverse City. One day she came in from the mailbox, and there sat the garbage can by the garage, and she painted a watercolor of the garbage can sitting there, and believe it or not, she won an award in the next art show. She had the dents in it, she had the rust in it, she had the lid sitting on there crooked, she had the label that was required for the disposal company to pick it up. It had everything, and it had the shadows against the garage. And there again, it was a beautiful painting. In fact, we have it in our home, and it's a garbage can. So anything can become a painting. You don't have to paint Mount Rushmore or the landscape of New York to come up with a beautiful painting. It can be anything simple. Go out and pick a flower. The other day at home, I went out and picked some purple violets that we had growing there, put them in a clear glass, and painted a painting on some cards of purple violets. If you're going to paint florals, I do say this, and I really believe this. There is nothing like painting from a real flower. You can take photos, yes, that's good. You can take, pictures from magazines, anything, but nothing is like painting from the real flower. You can twist it, you can look at it, and you'll see shadows in it that you sometimes don't show up on the camera. But cameras and photos are a good source for topics and for paintings. We prepared the paints, got it ready now, and one thing I want to talk about is values. Values in the art world is the intensity of the color. This is a very light value. This is darker, and this is really dark. This is about the darkest color. what you can do is you should take a color and you make 10 stripes of water, and you come in with the same color, and you should make it from the darkest to the very lightest. And you could take each one of these and show 10 values. The more values you have in a painting, the more interesting it is. This one, for example, this goes from the very white, and by the way, there is no white paint. They make one called Chinese white watercolor, but it is not very, very opaque. So I use it more if I want to make a creamy peach or a creamy pink, mix it with one of these other colors or 2 or 3 colors, but there is no white. The white is either the paper, well, it is the paper. You either leave it out or you mask over it with a masking, and I will get to that later. So what you see here is pure paper. See, this is a very light value. This is a very dark value. And there again, the more values you have in a painting, the more interesting your painting is. You can see this goes from very dark to light, to light, to light. There's a lot of values in here. This happens to be one where I painted into the mat. That, number one, they like it in the galleries, and number two, it certainly proves it's an original painting. They haven't figured out how they can print into the mat, especially when it's a double mat. So painting out into the mat makes it a very interesting painting. Brushes and brush strokes. I recommend that you take a brush and you experiment with it, just like I'll show you here. Okay, I'm going to take a round brush, and I'm going to use one of these mimic brushes that I suggested in the first film. Okay, and take a little water and this, and learn to. Okay, you can do that with a round brush. You can do that with a round brush. And you need to play with it so you get the feel of what the brush will do and will not do. Okay? Now we're going to wash out that brush, and I'll take a flat brush to show you what a flat brush will do. Now I want to get clear water on that brush. I don't want to dip my brush back in here. I want to dip it in here before I get paint. And I will use let's use a blue. Okay? Now, with a flat brush, you can get this. You can get, if you want to paint the leaf on a daffodil, it's like this. And while that is still wet, you can also come along here and introduce. Now see, that's still wet. I'm going to touch it up here, and it'll run right down and follow that down. Or you can come along and you can take clear water, put that down here, and then I'm going to touch it right here at the end, and there it goes. Now you could not paint that with a brush. See, it's heavier here, depends on where the paint was or where the water was. So that's one thing you can do with a brush. Another thing is, and you can see from these demonstrations here, you can take and create, well, I want to show you what a rigger brush will do, because a rigger brush does something different than anything else. We're going to take this rigger brush or you can get it that wide. But see, the rigger brush is very, very much into details. Now, one of the things you want to learn is a wash. I will show you what a wash is. A wash is very important. Here are some of the pictures showing what you can do. Here's what a flat rigger does, and here's one with a point. I have, this one is flat on the end. See? A real pointed one gets you a very, very sharp point. Here again, holding your brush up straight will give you a different mark than if you lay it down flat. The way that hopped along there, that's called dry brushing. That is very effective in painting fence posts, barns, whatever. But you want to make sure the brush does not have too much paint. So see? See how that's skipping along? And what it is, it's bringing out the texture of the paper, and the brush is just lighting it on the top. But the main thing there is not to have too much paint or water on your brush. Otherwise, it'll just make a solid line. Here again, a dry brush is used in making a birch tree. You can make a very effective birch tree just with the dry brush, okay? You can splatter. You'll learn to do that. Okay, we're going to splatter with now, if I come along with that, I can splatter clear water on it and see how it's beginning to spread those dots out. And that's very effective in making a tree or a shrub or any kind of foliage, okay? Now, painting with a palette knife. Let's see, do I have one? Just a second. Maybe I don't. Oh yeah. You can paint very effectively with a palette knife. To make branches on a tree. Okay, let's say we want to paint pine needles. So that's what you can do with a palette knife. You can also take your palette knife and I'm going to paint this area here darker. And I can scrape with a palette knife. That's also very effective to use the handle of this brush. Now see, that's making a dark line. When that dries, it's making a groove, the paint is running in it. If you catch it just right in dryness, you're pushing the paint away now and it leaves a white mark. So these are just some of the tricks, and not tricks, but techniques you can use to create the desire of whatever you're trying to paint. You can, I don't have one, but you can take a popsicle stick and sharpen it. You can take a twig off of a tree and paint with that, and it'll jump around and make very clever little twigs or branches off of a tree. You can take a toothbrush and splatter. I want to turn this over. So you can see where that's drying, where I pushed it away with a toothbrush. That's very effective in painting sand on a beach. 2 or 3 shades of brown or beige or ochre, this happens to be ochre right here, can make beautiful sand on a beach. You cannot do that with a brush, but you can certainly do that with a toothbrush. Now we need to look at painting wet on, where did I put that piece of paper? Okay. Wet on dry. Okay. I'm going to do it with a round brush. Give me this round brush. This is painting wet on dry. You will have a very sharp edge, okay? This is painting, you're going to water it first. This is called painting wet on wet. And you'll see it just blends in. And you'll get those fuzzy edges. There again, sometimes you want that. This in here is what happened where I painted wet on wet, and then I lifted it. See, I can lift it with this. You can also get a lot of texture by using a crumpled up paper towel. Okay, this is very effective in painting the petals on a flower or the leaf of a flower. You merely wad this up, and see what it did? It lifted up some of the paint, but it's all wrinkly, so it's all irregular that you don't have control of. As I said earlier, control is one of those things, you just don't want to be too controlling to do this. Okay, a flat brush wash, okay? One thing you will get, okay, I'll show you just a second. Okay, this is a flat brush wash. Okay? Now, if you make a mistake and you drop some water in there, or you come back to try to paint it, you're going to get what is called a bloom or a backwash. Sometimes you want those, sometimes you don't. If you get them, you can lift those out with a scrubber. After a while, when you get into it, this is a scrubber. And see, the scrubber will, I can scrub that all the way back down to white paper. There again, because it's a transparent color. If that was an opaque color, you could not do that. Some colors are more staining than others. Some are more permanent than others. Greens are the most permanent. If they're on there, you can lift them off some, but you can never get it back down to pure white paper. It's just because of the nature of it. See, by lifting that up, what I got, the texture that I got there. Okay, salt. There again, while this is wet, I should use a dark color. Salt works best with dark colors. However, I have used salt with just yellow and it came out very effective. Now what you want to do with the salt is you want to put it in your hand like this and then take and drop a few grains. You don't want it to come out in a big clump, because what it does, then it just becomes a hard clump. It doesn't create the effect you want of being scattered. That'll dry in a few minutes and we can see what it is. Another effective way is to drop clear water on wet paint. And see the texture it's creating? Beautiful. When you're doing florals especially, you're always looking for the background. What can I do for the background? These kind of things will help you create a background. Here is a backwash or a bloom right in here. See it? Now I created that because I wanted it there. And where it's a certain dryness, I can drop water or more paint and it will start moving it around. But that's a self-made, man-made backwash. Sometimes they happen, but you can take this and scrub them out. But look at the texture that made by just dropping water. You can also use rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol will make a round circle about the size of a dime, and it's totally different than anything else. It's very effective, and if you want to paint fish or something underwater, rubbing alcohol will create the bubble effect that you're looking for. Okay, we covered splatting. Okay, you can lift paint, as I said. Okay, painting with a palette knife, we colored. Okay, painting on cold press versus hot press paper. There again, this is the man-made paper, and it acts more like hot press paper because it is slicker than the Arches paper that I recommend. It doesn't have quite the texture that the Arches paper has. But there again, all of these cards, and I usually paint about 500 a year, these are all painted on that paper that is man-made. You'll learn to do it and you'll learn to play with it. But it's a great way of mixing color. Also, mixing color on paper is very effective, and it's something you want to do. And here is a good example of mixing color on paper. This has got like 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 colors. This has 2. So what you do is you'll take this, and we're going to start out with we'll start out with some yellow. Okay, and I want to make a green, and I'm going to get just a little bit here. Again, I'll show you the Payne's gray. Now see, that's mixing on paper. I didn't mix up a green. I used Payne's gray and yellow. If you want to mix up a purple, and there again, we were taught in school, red and blue makes purple. Well, that's only true with certain things. With watercolors, it depends on what red and depends on what blue. This is one of the reds, which is called Permanent Rose. And if I mix that with cobalt, I get a beautiful, beautiful lilac. Now, if I use Winsor Red, okay, and I mix that with cobalt, look at the difference. And the difference is the red that I used. Those are things you will learn, and the more you play and the more you experiment, the better it is. And the more colors you can create by mixing, the more vibrant your painting will be. Now over here, this is dry now, and I want to show you what's called glazing. Okay, that is cobalt blue. In fact, that's an intense blue, it's called. But I want that to be, I want to glaze over that. And see the green that it made? Because I used, yellow is very transparent, but you see, oh here, I'll do it with this one, Aurelian. the marks under there that I made with the palette knife are still coming through. The transparent colors will allow you to glaze over it with another transparent, but what's under there will still be visible. This one's a good one right here. We can take this one and we can take this real light green. Now watch if I glaze over that. See how it makes that just glow. And here if I take this and I glaze over that, you still see that yellow is coming through. Yellow is one of those colors you normally want to put it down first and glaze over it. Or it's also used to take yellow, and I'll use it right there. I will glaze over with yellow or with Aurelian, and you can see there the texture of what I dropped in there is still coming right through. Okay? That really covers what I want to cover in what you do and what you paint and how you paint. One thing on composition, and that's the last thing I want to show you, but it is important and I want you to remember. If you've had drawing lessons, you probably learned this. If you haven't, you want to take your paper and you want to divide it like this. You want to divide it in thirds this way and thirds this way. You put your subject matter there or there or there or there. You cannot go wrong. You don't want to put it there. That is very, very boring. Also, if you are going to do a landscape, you want the horizon to be there or here. You don't want it in the middle. There again, that's very boring. So if you put this is the skyline, this is the sky, from here down is earth, or the other way. Those are just two little key things in drawing that if you follow those, you will not ruin your composition. Even if you're going to paint a flower, I think this way, even if I'm doing a card. The main flower, okay, I'm going to paint a flower and it's got leaves and it's got buds. The main flower goes either in one of these four sections. And you want one to be the center of attention. You don't want two or three center of attention. Now that can be created by size, it can be created by color, or in a floral, this could be the main flower, the rest can be buds and leaves. So those are kind of the little things you need to think about. So I hope you enjoy this, and of course, if you join us at OPC for one of our art classes, and they usually run about 4 weeks, about 2 hours for 4 weeks, each of the 4 weeks, you'll be able to come up with a good watercolor, I can guarantee you that. I've had people in my class who never painted before, and within 4 weeks, they were doing paintings that should be framed and matted. Okay, that concludes this for today.